So here's the panel for you. I won't take more time. We are very proud to have you here. So let's roll. So the first presenter is Dr. Ellen.
Hello, I'm Ellen Fitzpatrick. Thanks for coming this afternoon. I hope you had a lot of coffee, so you're not going to be sleepy. What I'm going to do is to present a simple framework for thinking about designing for sustainability and evaluating sustainability in the project scenario. So I'm going to start out with that conceptual framework, then my colleagues are going to give you 2 examples or case studies of the work that they've been involved in. Okay. So the problem that, as we are all aware of, is that many of the NGOs, government, multilaterals, talk about sustainability. They're all in all the project proposals, but very few actively design it into their projects and then go back after the project has ended and actually measure that sustainability. So why is that important? Well, some of it is the ethics of do no harm. We also raise expectations of project participants without really knowing whether whether that will improve their livelihoods in the long run. We also, perhaps most profoundly, we miss an opportunity to learn about what really works and why, and integrate that back into our program planning. So there's a need for a conceptual framework to understand how change perks through systems. Metrics and guidelines to track sustainability processes and outcomes. So what we'll look at today is this illustration of both the successes and the challenges for designing sustainability from recent work in Malawi, Bolivia, and India. And this is the beginning of this work. We need to, over time, deepen the framework and the guidelines, and apply a systems approach much akin to the approach that our colleagues in conservation biology or ecology use. So as we think about sustainable development, think of that we've had a lot of discussions in the workshops preceding this and today, but thinking about it as a process of social change that tackles structural problems and is rooted in continual learning and innovation. So we can look at sustainable development programs as needing to be flexible. They're iterative systems where success is a function of both the design of the program and the participants' innovation and learning processes. So how do you create a systemic process of learning and innovation? So let's look at first the process piece. So the community that we're working with as lead actors, experimenters that identify and solve the problems within the intervention. If it's going to be sustainable long after the program ends, we need to have the institutions and human capacity to replace what the program has catalyzed. And by institutions, I mean the norms, the rules of the game that would govern that process. So the program, the intervention, should act as a catalyst. So some of the things that may be elements that may be catalyzed are the development of local social capital that's necessary to maintain performance over time. So this may be cooperatives, associations, local civic organizations. And the change that's created by participants and their institutions via networking will be important as well. So here we may see bonds of trust and reciprocity, partnerships. This is where we'll see experimentation and innovation. And this is important because then we can evaluate the program's contribution to sustainable development on how well it catalyzes and supports institutions and capacity building. So we're looking for creating positive change and generating as little negative change or negative unintended consequences, and then examining the positive net changes along with the process issues that we talked about. So, for example, equality or equity. Are we leveling? Is the intervention leveling the playing field? Are marginalized populations better off? Well-being, which is not only income, living conditions, and what we're looking for is structural change in the economy. And this may come out in increased food security, increased opportunities for livelihood, and also land tenure issues. And this may be very important in the rural areas where we're interested in the willingness of participants to experiment and to innovate. If there's insecure land tenure, this may be very difficult. So other outcomes that we're all familiar with may be diversity of opportunities, access to functioning markets, cultural acceptability. Now let me spend just a minute or so on Malawi. Malawi's project was an asset transfer conducted by Heifer International. We went back 7 years after the project, and we looked at several elements that I think are important in a sustainability framework. What happened to well-being? So increased income juxtaposed to a living income benchmark, increased food security, but perhaps most important are the creation of local institutions and enhanced social capital. So we used social network analysis to trace out the relationships that evolved as an outcome of the intervention. So those relationships had to do with the exchange of information, the passing of information and knowledge, safety nets, and economic opportunity. And what was really interesting is that we could trace those lines of economic opportunity through backward and forward linkages and really be able to see after 5 years, endogenous growth occurring in those economic structures in the community. The learning and knowledge sharing that was passed on, that happened through passing on that asset of livestock in this case. We saw growing membership in the cooperatives that were initiated, and a change in milk quality standards that was reinforced by the group. We also saw women's empowerment in the sense of decision-making in production, ownership of assets, and control over income and time. So we could measure that through, we used the Women in Agriculture Empowerment Index to look at that. So now I'd like to introduce my colleague, Ileana, who will talk about, or will demonstrate in her case study, the Fairtrade coffee in Bolivia.
Thank you, Ellen. Good afternoon. This is a case study. What I did is I took the framework that was just presented by Ellen, and we apply it to a pilot project in CLAC. So let me tell you a little bit first about CLAC. CLAC is the network of producers and workers, Fairtrade certified in Latin America and the Caribbean. We currently work in 24 countries, representing over 900 organizations for different commodities, as you can see there, coffee, banana, cocoa, sugar, and so on. So this project, the name of the project was Youth Leading Climate Change Adaptation Project. And this project emerged after the rust crisis, hit Caranavi, which is known as the coffee capital in Bolivia. And the context that was there was 60% production lost. And this was because of the rust, but also other factors were not helping the producers bounce back from the current situation, such as soil depletion, bad crop management practices, and so on. So, well, this is a little bit of the project. I'm not gonna go into all the details, but the main purpose of this project was to increase adaptation capacity, climate change adaptation capacity for the producer organizations. How we did that, we had a bunch of activities, but here I'm just going to mention or highlight a couple of those. We created demonstration plots. There was a curriculum built for youth participants who were closely linked with the producer organizations. They were either members of the producer organizations itself, or they were sons or daughters of those members. And the curriculum had two main components and a lot of different topics, but the two main components were to develop the soft skills, such as leadership communication, so they can perform as extensionists, and then all the technical expertise that needed to be, for them to work as extension. So, in the sustainability assessment, in the part of the process, the producer organizations, since they already have a governance body on its own, they were engaged, fully engaged and participated in the problem identification as well as the intervention areas. Then the governance of the project, once the project materialized, was rooted in the network of Bolivian and Fairtrade organizations, in addition to the producer organizations and of course CLAC. So having those two elements really enabled the cultural appropriateness, which is the other element of the process, which is tied very strong related to the activities that were identified and appropriate for the project. And then on the second section, we have the actual development achievements. So the project objectives, production increase, capacity, etc. But then we also had two other elements that were not necessarily demonstrated or proven through the logic frame or the project final evaluation, which were the inclusion of young men and women who are traditionally underrepresented in these communities. And then we had what we're calling here value creation. So these youth built resilience, and they were empowered through these trainings and the position that they gained in the society, in the communities, because now they were perceived as something to look at or to be listened and receive advice from. And finally, the last couple of elements that we will be looking at in the sustainability assessment is that continuous adaptation and learning. So yes, in the training curriculum, there was some technologies that were promoted, but also in this training curriculum and in the other components of the project, the idea or the objective was to sensitize people about climate change and to equip them with tools for them to continuously adapt as this climate change situation evolves in those coffee communities. And then lastly, we have the replication and scale up. So this project was a pilot project. So in essence itself, it needed to prove whether the model would work or not for future replication. So the intervention model was systematized to be used, evaluated, and if positive results were obtained, then replicated in other projects, but also the curricula. The curricula and the components were documented for future use. So now my colleague from Barefoot College. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm from Barefoot College, and here I'm trying to, I've come here to just give an insight on how we work and how we have evolved through the whole process of learning and unlearning and relearning. So my organization focuses on empowering the young grandmothers from the last mile communities. And when we talk about last mile communities, these are all the areas where they are kind of remote, unelectrified, and inaccessible. And our main focus is here to empower women in the use of technology and the transfer of technology. How we do that is we have a training programs where most of the women where you see here, they come for 6 months training in Rajasthan, and all of them, they come from different cultural backgrounds, different languages. They do not have any common language. And the curriculum is built mostly on visual cues and learning by doing process. And one of the other aspects where we focus on is co-creation of the training module. So what has emerged out of from our Solar Mamas have been a newer program which we have been trying to implement since the last 5 years, which is called as Enrich, because now they see themselves beyond the technical training of being a barefoot solar engineer, but also as educators in their community. They see themselves as decision makers in their community, and where we have seen as a constant evolution of the training curriculum and how we co-create with them. We've seen the spaces where right now they want to incentivize on their skills to learn newer skills, which is called as adaptive learning. So we have seen how they can use it in their context to to interact with our organization after 5 years or 6 years. Suppose if the system has been broken down, how they can communicate with us for immediate help. So these are some slides from our field. One aspect where I would want to focus more is on our sustainability, how I would define in 4 major broad categories. One is the social aspect, where we focus on the community governance, where it's much more like bottoms-up approach. Most of the feedbacks are looped into and the decision-making power is given with the committees. It lies with the committees, and the committees has like 50% of women's participation. So, what we have seen is also the shifting of the traditional roles from the women to become leaders in their own community. The second, what we have seen in the economic front is that we have 2 instances, like one in the case of Indonesia, where we have seen that the community really owns this project, and they have evolved from one aspect of re-engineering, where in Indonesia there were fishermen folks where the women, they have opened up the solar lanterns, and they've used these LED lanterns to attract more fishes and to improve their catch. So that they can increase their income. In the second aspect, where we have seen in India especially, is how women, they have leveraged on their skills of technical skills, and now they're aspiring to become entrepreneurial. So we have taken those feedbacks into our India chapter to build on the base of pyramid exercises. So this is what we've been doing, and building up on policy framework and dialogue in global and national context. And this we have also tracked since 1991. These programs have evolved, and this is how we are trying to track our changes. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And a round of applause for the presenters. And we have our next presenter.
Yes, I would like to present you the results of a midterm evaluation made in 2016 on the results-based financing for low-carbon energy access facility within energizing development. It has been done by Partizip and Arepo, 2 German consultancies. And sometimes, the product we have is, 120 pages, I think. But for today, I really went into all this in pages again and tried to depict really some highlights. So I'm not going to present you the whole, just a picture of it. And for me, it's also important to somehow share with you my experiences, or our experiences, because we're gonna have a final evaluation right now. We are starting, so I'm really keen on some input. So what's the results-based financing for low-carbon energy access facility? It distributes, or its aim was to distribute modern, long-lasting and affordable energy systems to the poor through viable business models, key feature is payment upon delivery, means private sector is engaged, and aim is to mitigate market and growth barriers, transform the market and lift it onto an efficient, sustaining level has been, or should be, the overall aim. So the approach was to integrate RBF in short projects into regular NDEF interventions. It's a huge world-spanning program. And it's wanted to determine and deliver incentives to the various recipients. These varied from advanced market commitments to auctions and output-based aid. There were eligible service providers able to participate on a competitive basis. Pre-agreed results were only broadly defined to encourage product and service innovation. Disbursement of funds is contingent on the delivery of predetermined verified results, and monitoring and verification system functioned as a trigger for the disbursement. So what's the NDEF project setup? There is NDEF country projects in a number of countries worldwide. As I said, they cooperate with financial institutions. Then we have a private delivery chain, the end consumers in the end who are asking for cook stoves. Or we have, well, there were several, as I said, several projects which could apply for. In total, 32 projects applied, 12 were delivered and selected. And the projects that we really then talk about is, for instance, biogas in Vietnam, or many Pico PV projects, also mini grids. So we have a really broad project setup. So when it came to the RBF outcomes in December 2017, we can say that overall 1.5 million people gained access to clean energy services in these 17 projects. 395,500 devices were sold. That could be solar system or cook stove, biogas digesters. Then through Pico PV, solar lightning and mini grid, 890 kV total installed renewable energy capacity. We're talking about emission reductions equivalent to 5.2 million were achieved. €1 spent, 3.6 euro of private investment, and 3,500 jobs have been created. That is, well, the provision was £30 million plus 10 million later on. It came through and from DFID, and it was later launched through 3 competitive rounds and calls in the countries. So, but what I really want to concentrate is, and that was also my task for today, what were the pre-project temporary barriers in the design, or which we thought would be the temporary barriers to market uptake. Well, in the supply, we thought, okay, there's working growth capital and business capacity limitations, and we thought that service providers would, well, have, so to some extent, know-how, and but what about risk-taking? Yeah, staff could be problematic. Investments, supply chains, participation in tenders and biddings, we were also not sure whether that would be asked for. And then we thought, okay, in terms of demand, access to financing and cultural awareness barriers, because yeah, might be on all the result, all the chains. We asked, do the products which are sold are really appealing, and are there affordable prices? So in the end, when I look at it today, did we really overcome temporary market barriers? First of all, it's really difficult to compare 17 projects in not really 17 countries, a bit less, but with really not very homogeneous products. As I said, we have Pico PV installations, we have solar street lights in Benin, we have mini grids In Rwanda, we are trying to compare cook stoves in Africa with cook stoves in Vietnam. We are trying to compare different incentive systems. We are trying to compare different pre-setups because, of course, some countries also already had their ongoing market products. So it's really difficult to come to overall conclusions. But you know, I was asked to do some looking back, and I did so. So overall, we can say that in terms of supply, working growth capital and business capacity had its limitations. Know-how and risk-taking was partially a limit. Staff, yes, in many cases, difficult. Investments, yeah, working capital, yes, we've overcome it. Growth capital, no. Supply chains, yes, we overcame that. Participation in tenders and biddings was partly successful and partly not. And then on the demand side, the access to financing and cultural awareness, bareness, did we overcome them? I would say yes, in many cases, but that always depended also on the service provider. Sometimes you have manufacturers that had really appealing products, or people that were just giving services in mini-grids. There, the appealing products, well, not always, because there was also limited availability. But overall, yes, we can say, especially if it comes to Pico PV, we had appealing products. Affordable prices that depended on the product. So overall, we can say, okay, we thought of some factors, but we can also say that there were always new or are new limiting factors arising. The businesses so far still pick the low-hanging fruit. Very few local distributors serve the difficult and remote markets, although that of course was the challenge to bring Pico PV to the last mile. So the last mile distribution remains problematic. We heard today that it's always difficult to really touch and come and bring bring products to the rural poor. The poor, of course, we tried to target, but in the end it turned out that it's more the middle class people that could afford and really then bought the items. Then significant price drops for products did not take place, and in some projects we had also MFIs, that means microfinance institutions in between, that should play a leading role, but in the end they did not help to remove the affordability barriers. So conclusions, temporary barriers on the supply side were tackled with varying results. There is some success in access to financing and investment capital, some success in building up business capacities. Barriers on the demand side were partially removed, although we had no specific strategy targeting them. That's also fine to have a look at that back from today's perspective, so that's clearly something we have to improve on. And overall, we have to say that the barriers are dynamic. As soon as one barrier is removed, the next limiting factor can be identified. I'm sure you have the same experiences here in the audience. And therefore, projects need to be constantly analyzing the market state and adjust their range of activities. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Martina. You touched upon an important dimension of it, which is how project design features can be tinkered around and need to be adjusted to enhance sustainability. The first two presentations basically provided thematic perspective. The next one is from Tron. He would be providing a geographic perspective. It's one of the two major evaluations that have been supported to conduct post-completion evaluations in two different geographical contexts. One is the LDCs, which is still ongoing, and another one is SIDS, where GEF has found sustainability concerns are more evident. So,
my presentation is on the sustainability and relevance of the GEF projects in small island development states. But before going into that review that has been ongoing now for a year, I would like to jump directly into an example to have as a fishing hook for your interest in the subject. This fisher village in the north of Comoros, it's a village where the people is experiencing that their traditional coastal fishing is getting more and more difficult. This is due to overfishing, mangrove and coral reef destruction, coastal erosion, water contamination and climate change with variable weather patterns. So the fishermen and fisherwomen can no longer rely on the climate as they understood it before. And there are also more and more frequency of natural disasters. Sometimes the fish they catch are ruined because the cold storage doesn't work due to power outage and lack of local renewable energy to replace electricity from the grid. There you can see what they are using. Small fishing boats, and with those boats they are going further and further from the shore because the coastal fishing is not reliable anymore. They can go so far as 100 to 120 kilometers from the shore with those small boats. And high waves, strong winds and ocean currents make it a very dangerous journey. And at least 8 fishermen from the same village have drowned during the last years. This group of fishermen, the reason I don't have any fisher women on the photo is that they are in the market selling the fish. And the man there marked with the arrow, he had a very interesting story. Last year his boat was taken by the wind and the current, and he ended up on the coast of Mozambique. Here you can see the map of Comoros. He was from the northernmost tip on Gran Comora, and he ended up there on the west coast of Mozambique. And he didn't know any Portuguese. He was arrested due to lack of ID card. And after that, the population released him. He wanted to put him in a boat to the ocean again, gave him some food, but he denied that due to all the dangerous pirates in the region. And he had also an interesting experience that he found a fisherman that had the same fate 50 years earlier and settled in Mozambique and was very happy to speak his native language for the first time after 50 years. So finally the situation was resolved by intervention by the government of Comoros, and the fisherman was paid a plane ticket home. But with that example, I just wanted to show all the different things the small island development states are struggling with, especially the poorest ones of them. It's first of all the climate change that is changing everything for them, and then overexploitation of the natural resources. And already difficult situation is getting more and more difficult. Well, now over to the objectives of the evaluation. A strategic country cluster evaluation was carried out this year. In fact, from November last year, on the GEF portfolio in SIDS. And it was based on the request from the GEF Council members on a more in-depth review of the GEF project in SIDS. The overarching objectives of the evaluations were twofold: to provide a deeper understanding of the determinants of sustainability or the outcomes of the project, and to assess the relevance of the GEF support towards SIDS' main environmental challenges from the counter perspective. The choice to evaluate the SIDS as a strategic cluster was based on the shared geophysical constraints resulting in disproportionately large economic, social, and environmental challenges. So to review or to carry out this review, we focused on three key evaluation questions. What are the key factors influencing or driving sustainability of outcomes in SIDS? Two, in what way does the environment and socioeconomic development context and the water, energy, food nexus help explain the observed sustainability? And three, to what extent has GEF support been relevant to the main environmental challenges the SIDS face? And also if there are any gaps there. The study also covered the cross-cutting issues of gender participation, resilience, and private sector engagement. The case study's main focus was, however, on sustainability, especially for projects completed between 2007 and 2014, to provide sufficient time after completion to observe early trends towards sustainability of change. While relevance was also reviewed for newer projects, some of them also ongoing. Personally, I carried out 7 of the country visits in nearly all the regions, and another consultant did 3 more. And then there was 1 pilot, so in total it was 11 countries. There were Kiribati and Vanuatu in the Pacific, then in the Indian Ocean, as I showed there, the Comoros, Mauritius, Maldives, and Seychelles. And in the Caribbean, I went to Jamaica, and the other consultant, she went to St. Lucia, Dominican Republic, and Belize. And I almost forgot a country that is not an island, but was still included because it's considered SIDS, Guinea-Bissau on the west coast of Africa. I already mentioned the climate change issue, and many of the context-related factors in SIDS are climate change related. For instance, sea level rise, that is the most critical factors in atoll islands, such as Kiribati and Maldives. And increased impact of climate-related natural disasters, such as flooding and landslides, caused by storms and hurricanes, or in other regions called cyclones or typhoons, as well as beach erosion that is gradually reducing the size of many islands. And we have unpredictable climate variations affecting the agriculture and fisheries, reduced biodiversity, including on the coral reef, affecting livelihoods and tourism. And the coral bleaching you have heard about, and breakdown and destruction of coral barriers that give less resilience to storms and tsunamis. And finally, one very important issue in SIDS is the stronger impact of invasive alien species. That has they always had that problem, but it has increased a lot due to climate change. Other issues in SIDS that are not directly climate related are, for instance, that many of them are volcanic islands, so they might have active volcanoes or dormant volcanoes, and even those that don't have any volcanoes, they are often struck by earthquakes and tsunamis because they are volcanic regions. And all the problems are the destruction of the mangroves that traditionally protected the coastlines. And the mangroves give the main areas for shrimps. So now when they destroy the mangroves to set up shrimp farms and fish farming, that doing something negative at the same times, and they also are the preferred areas for tourist resorts, of course. So many of those SIDS have a very large distance between the islands. That's another problem for the SIDS. They have problems with communication between the islands, and that leads to very high cost of transport, cost of products, both those that come from abroad and the communication between the islands, and all social services are more expensive than in other countries. And finally, they have problems with covering their energy demand. Still, many SIDS, they rely on kerosene, for instance. It's very little developed renewable energy, even though they have a high potential for solar energy and waves and also thermal energy. So the SIDS related factors that are contributing to sustainability, I would especially mention that improvement of coastal protection through seawalls, that might be a very expensive alternative, but also coral protection, regeneration, and mangrove reforestation, that are important projects to support. Then you have the Reach to Reef projects. Those that are not familiar with it, it's in fact watershed management programs that starts from the top of the islands and end at the coral reef. And there are other similar integrated projects that are called whole island approach, and well, many names of it. To integrate SIDS in regional programs is important because they have small population and not so much resources. So they can really benefit from regional programs and learn from the neighboring countries. They don't have enough resources to combat the invasive species. So instead of all the time cutting down and try to combat it that way, I have been arguing for putting more into research of the alternatives, how they can get some economy out of it. and get some products that could at least finance part of the costs they are using for combat. And use of renewable resources. You know that the best projects are often those that can combine adaptation and mitigation. So, such as the problems they have with waste, if that can be used for energy, that are win-win projects. And recycling and all the problems they have with the garbage that are coming from other parts of the world and to the ocean, that they have to deal with too. It seems like I'm running out of time, so I will just skip one of them, just to highlight that there are many projects or problems that SIDS have in common with other small countries, and for instance, governance and lack of institutional development is a problem in SIDS too. So to be able to fight back on behalf of the SIDS, it's necessary to have a realistic project design, awareness raising and capacity building, have a strong participation and influence from the local stakeholders that are creating ownership, and gender mainstreaming more than head count. That is something that not only SIDS but other countries could learn from. And have an adaptive project management, improving monitoring and evaluation and procurement, and strengthening existing structures instead of all the time coming up with something new. And then for sustainability, also important is to assure sustainable financing for the post-project period, and replication and scaling up based on lessons learned. Not only innovation is positive, but it's also important to scale up and replicate those that have successes. This is the final slide, by the way. We have some emerging findings. We cannot say conclusions yet because this is an ongoing process. The projects reviewed, they have a variable expectation of sustainability that are mostly positive, but also some negative projects at or the rating at the moment of closing. But doing the ex post evaluation, I've seen that many projects that were negatively rated at the moment they closed or in the terminal evaluation, they turned out to be quite positive later on. Especially those projects where they haven't finished yet all the targets. But if the local stakeholders and the local government knew that it was important and they put in the extra effort to comply with it, even though it was after the project was officially finished, then that is something is showing sustainability. Well, only the last one, that is with another color. There's very strong interest for financing targeting SIDS mentioned from all the SIDS countries, and I think that will be mentioned again in some of the other sessions here. Thank you.
Thank you, Trond. Thank you. So Trond brought a geographical perspective. Our next presenters, Susan and Jindra, would look at a set of climate change projects, but they would also ask questions about whether enough of post-project completion evaluations are being done, and are they being done right? So here.
Super, thank you. Okay. Do you want to switch with me so you're next to me? We can hand off the microphone. Okay, thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you for your patience this afternoon and getting through everything. Could I have a quick show of hands of people who work primarily on climate change projects? Would you raise your hand if you do? Okay, good. That's quite helpful to know. For the rest of you, if we wander into climatease, please just wiggle your hand and we'll elaborate on some of the terms. I know I tend to get very much into acronyms, so here we go.
So, hi, I'm Yindra. We gathered together very disparate fields. I work on post-project evaluation the last 6 years at Valuing Voices, and Susan works on climate. So the thing we wanted to talk about. Oh, yes, wonderful. So the reason you see two tractors is it could go either way, right? We've all seen abysmal failures, like the tractor on the left. A few of us have seen some great successes. So we really believe you have to go back, because why in God's name are we doing the work unless it's to be sustained? So I promise this is true. $5 trillion has been spent on foreign aid since 1945, 137 billion spent in 1 year, but fewer than 1% of all global development projects have been evaluated for sustained impacts. Let that sink in. Less than 1%. So we mean well, we promise sustainable development, but we don't fund its evaluation or learn from it. Maybe everything's going terrifically. Maybe they're all red tractors, but we won't know unless we show up and ask. So very briefly, we've talked about this. There's a big difference between what a final terminal evaluation can tell you, which is about, they look at lots of things, but they look at projected sustainability. The impact is the probability of continued long-term benefits, according to the OECD DAC, as compared to a ex-post project evaluation actually looks at actual. It looks on the sustainability of the projects, their concrete metrics. And we look at, typically, JICA has done most of them in the world. Terrific, folks. 3 years after. We go anywhere from 2 to 20 years after. And so do you see this leaf? It looks like a leaf, but it's actually a bug. So you may say, oh, I've done a terminal evaluation. I know all about sustainability. And we say, not so fast. So this is an example from Hygiene Water, because the environment piece. So at Valuing Voices, we've done 6 post-project evaluations. I've looked at hundreds of them. We have a repository. Please go visit our website with all these catalytic organizations and the post-projects that they've posted. So this is training received. The purple bars is not only training received, but people were actually doing them. Right, so they were doing water filtration at the end of the project. 3 years after, were the activities sustained? Well, it wasn't that bad. It was a bit over 80 and it's a bit over 60. It's a 20% drop-off. Latrines fared worse, hand washing fared better, household cleanliness fared better, portable water. So I would say this chart is quite typical. We've also seen abysmal post-projects where it's gone down to 0. One organization actually was doing a water evaluation for USAID, and they found out it was worse than at baseline, right? So we need to go back and learn, and I've also done one in Niger that people were feeding themselves 30% more 3 years after than at final. So it could go either way. We could go to the rusty tractor or the red tractor, the shiny tractor.
Okay. Great. So basically, we had 2 key questions that we wanted to look at. Yender, from I think from the post-project evaluation perspective, and me from the climate change mitigation perspective, because I follow the projects that I've worked on over the years, and I'm always very curious about what happens. Our first question was really to look at how evaluators measure the sustainability of climate change mitigation projects. And for this, I think we have looked at ex ante, looking at project closure, and then picked a pool so that we could look beyond. And then that was sort of a setup to look and see how effectively it's measured in terms of, was there some correlation between the estimated sustainability or assessed sustainability at the project closure and actual sustainability, depending on how you want to describe it. That's another, probably another panel, you know, post-project.
So we took the 2018 annual report from the GEF, which said there was a pool of 1372 projects. They said they had 53 post-completion verification reports. I leapt up and down. I don't know about anyone else. I was like, oh my God, let's share this. Let's learn from what they've done. It's phenomenal. And Susan's expertise is climate change mitigation, so we've been talking about working together on something. And so 17 of them, we chose the entire sample from the Appendix G of the report. We chose all 17. We looked up online, hard to find, but we did our best to find all the projects, which make up 1% of the total pool.
I would just want to say that the reason that we selected this pool was the stated availability of the post-completion verification reports, because while there has been climate finance for some time, other funds are relatively young. You know, Green Climate Fund doesn't yet have projects that are eligible for post-project evaluations. So that was sort of how we ended up with this group.
So the methodology, we really, I've been working a lot over the last 6 years on really looking at what are the conditions for sustainability, learning from the post-project reports and learning from a lot of literature on exit. What needs to be in place to exit sustainably. So there are, you know, basic, I think Ellen mentioned this and her team, there are resources you look at. What are the resources still there? Are they continuing? What about partnerships? Is it locally owned? Has the capacity been developed to continue doing this? But we've also found that unless one puts into place ways to assess the M&E, where there are transparent benchmarks during the implementation, showing everyone how close you're moving to sustainability or not, and that brings up the whole issue of adaptive management. Because if you have not tracked, if you have benchmarks that are showing things aren't going to be sustainable, then you should consider extending beyond. You should consider how you're phasing down over before just exiting out because the money ran out. Ideally, you have very good quantitative as well as quantitative indicators that actually show what was it like. Ideally at baseline, although it's astonishing how bad baseline data is. So ideally at final evaluations, you can go back post-project 2, 3, 5, 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
And then the contribution versus the attribution claims. There were lots of attributional claims in these 17. These projects were closed from 1999 to 2015. And we went to also look at, we always look at what are the methods, was it by field work, was it by desk research, how do we know? And these 17 make up nearly $200 million worth of investments.
Okay, one of the things I wanted to talk about is why, because often in energy evaluation, when people talk about ex post evaluations, they are referring to the terminal evaluation at the operational close of the project. And I want to explain why that can be difficult as a measure of sustainability in these types of projects. These are 2 projects in Uzbekistan. I was involved with the development of both of them. And in any climate change mitigation project, when you're looking at your ultimate development impact or your measure of greenhouse gas emission reductions, you have a certain amount of reductions that you accrue during the project lifetime, the administrative lifetime. So that's a 3 to 5 year lifetime. But then you have the technical lifetime of the project, when you make assumptions about how many greenhouse gases the project will reduce or offset. You're thinking about a technology lifetime, so say 15 years for a solar panel or 20 years for an efficient building. And in reality longer, because people don't use buildings for just 20 years in most of the countries I've worked in. So in these projects, for example, the public buildings, the project I think was quite successful. It constructed a series of energy efficient schools. But the schools get constructed, you know, you train the architects, you have a competition, you develop a sort of a turnkey design that can be replicated, you build the schools, and you have data on your emission reductions. Yeah, maybe you have about 6 months of data by the end of the project, and it's not during the heating season. So the key to really finding out whether these projects are reducing the emissions we say they are, okay, is to know that. The other one, I just want to point this out because this is a project where there are mortgages, and the mortgages have a 20-year lifetime. So if we are going in to look at the 5-year project close, we are not going to find out how people managed to do, and we're also not going to find out much about gender differentiated impacts because there was some attempt to promote women's home ownership. We don't know how that will be. Okay, that's all right. Do you want me to start with this one? Okay, I just wanted to say that when we looked at the industry standard 4-point scale, it is the industry standard. You're looking at likely, marginally unlikely, and unlikely, and to be sustainable. And that is an assessment that a terminal evaluator makes during the terminal evaluation. And what we found is that this scale, it is very common, but it does not really capture, it's never been evaluated itself. It is not necessarily a reliable measure. I think it can be a useful conceptual tool for project screening, but in terms of actually predictive, we don't have any conditions where its predictive validity has been assessed.
And so we looked and we saw that 15 of the 17 were terminal. 2 were midterm in this group that we were told were post-project verified. There was anecdotal reporting. Some of the India projects, they said that there was, resources and ownership, allocated, 2007 to 2012, that there was sourcing locally far after the project closed, and that's terrific. But because there was no methods listed in any of these reports that would say to us, how did you find that out? How do we know that? Did you go back?
Okay, and we will be happy to expound on these slides at length later and during the reception or the question period. Okay, I think this is
so. Just in fact, we found 0 were post-project sustainability
in terms of criteria for
yeah. We just
impact evaluation.
We had no proof that anyone had gone back and that it was sustained.
Okay. I think we can move through these. Just wanted to say that in terms of current monitoring and evaluation activities, we didn't feel we were getting a robust picture of sustainability because you don't have the vast majority of impacts which accrue post-project in climate change mitigation cases.
And the report does say the outcome of most of the GEF projects are sustained during the post-completion period. We're all for it. We just didn't get enough information to believe that that was accurate.
Well, and this is an older pool of projects, I have to say. Right. These are, one of these is, I just, as an example, to close, these are 2 projects. Both of them got an assessed likely to be sustained at project termination. I visited both of these projects. I visited them both during the heating season. One of them is going to exceed its overall project estimates. The other one is not. And so just saying that there really needs to be, I think, some connection between the assessed, end of project measures, if you're going to use it to assess, and then going back to confirm. All right.
So we have some recommendations. So apply transparent methods, share data openly about how you went about doing this, and actually collect the data, know that you can go back. Evaluate assumptions about sustainability, about infrastructure, market uptake, training, duration of for how long are they supposed to be sustainable.
And then you're talking about different types of sustainability, how to differentiate between savings that you may build in and things that depend on behavior of people that are using the facilities and things that you construct. And then finally, consider looking at assessing the efficacy of this 4-point scale and thinking about alternatives. And that leads into some of the procedural recommendations, which really, looking at projects that have independently verified emissions, like clean development mechanism in some of the same program countries. There's a very rich program, there's sort of a pool there.
Because there's a lot of, the reports are saying, these are projected CO2 emissions. But if that heater is no longer working, then the projections are far from potentially accurate.
Right, and then I think just on a procedural level, budgeting for post-project evaluations and making sure that you retain data in country, also for learning. Okay, I think our final message is really just to tie in, the types of work that we are doing as climate change evaluators with what is happening at the Paris Agreement. And Article 13 very clearly says, countries, all countries, in fact, all of you in this room are from a country that has accepted, contributions and mandatory benchmarks and targets to provide a clear understanding of climate change action. So I think countries are now wanting to measure exactly what development interventions are doing in terms of climate change. And so I think it's really incumbent on us to sort of keep going with the development discussion about how we can make that happen. And we do.
Thank you. Thank you.
I think this session has shown, presenters have shown that post-project evaluations are important. Sustainability is an important issue, and they have brought different perspectives of how it's being addressed in different circumstances and how effective has it been. So I thank all the panelists and all the audience for being here and being part of this. So thank you all. Thanks.